and Preservation for the Greenwich Village Society for Historic Preservation. And I thank you all for coming tonight. This is a big turnout. I think it's great because I see that we have a lot of our members here and some of our board of trustees. For those of you that don't know, GVSHP works as an advocate for the cultural history and architecture of Greenwich Village, East Village, South Village, NoHo, and the Meatpacking District, as with anybody else. And I welcome you to this evening. There's been a little change from how we originally envisioned this. We originally envisioned this as people who live in the lobbies coming in speaking about them. We were lucky to get one stellar speaker who is going to speak about her lobby, and my role in this expanded quite a bit as a result. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take you through the development of Lower Fifth Avenue. I promise you're going to have lots of cocktail party information by the time you're done, and I'll take you through a lot of wonderful historic photos. I'm also going to talk to you, and so we'll sort of span the time from the beginning of the development in the 1830s up until about 1930. I always find that the press is a good time to sort of stop speaking. And I'm also going to take you into a little bit about multifamily housing. Everybody sort of knows what an apartment building is, what a hotel is, but a lot of people aren't completely clear on what apartment hotels are. And so because that was my thesis, I'm going to bore you all with that. Because the last two buildings that we'll be speaking about, including the one at 24 Fifth Avenue by our other speaker, were built as apartment hotels. Let me just tell you about the speaker who will follow me. Her name is Linda Ann Scavo. I did that very well. She is a dramatist, journalist, poet, and is completing her second documentary film on Texas Guinan, that's what I know, who lived at 17 West 8th Street. Her articles on the history of Greenwich Village have been published in The Villager and elsewhere. We're very lucky to have her. She's got some wonderful photos for you guys to see. Just turn this on. Oh, I can't turn that on. Okay. Linda said to me when we were speaking about this evening, she said, when I come, just so you know, I always wear a hat, I always wear gloves, and I have a long braid down my back. How will I recognize you? And I thought, well, I never wear a hat, and I never wear gloves, and it won't be lucky if my hair is brushed. So first image is from 1910 of Fifth Avenue. I thought that was a good way to start it. How do I get?
Yeah.
I did. Where's the laptop?
That doesn't matter.
Oh, sorry. AV is not my department. And the first thing I'm going to show you is 1831, when this area was still relatively undeveloped, and it shows us some of the original land holdings ripe for development. My intern actually just came across this map recently. I was pretty excited that she found it at NYPL, New York Public Library, which has a wonderful digital collection of maps for those of you that don't know. And the person who would kick off the development of Fifth Avenue was Henry Brewer Jr. He commissioned his mansion at the corner of 9th Street and Fifth Avenue. The architects he hired were Ithiel Town and Alexander Jackson Davis to design the townhouse. The pair were among the most highly respected architects in the country at the time, and they produced this very imposing Greek Revival mansion surrounded by gardens. It was completed in 1834, and he did this hoping to attract other wealthy people to the area, and he in fact did just that. William Cullen Bryant would call this a kind of palace in a garden. Upstairs there were 7 bedrooms and 9 servants' quarters. They also had a billiard room and a library and 2 parlors with an entrance hall. There is the story that he and his wife Laura had the first major social event in New York City. It was a masquerade ball, and the story goes that one of the, it was the consulate's, the Swiss consulate's daughter, I believe, who ran off with an American, and they eloped, and masquerade balls were subsequently banned for a while. So this, I think, is absolutely remarkable. This is my favorite map. This is the 1853 Paris map of Manhattan. Again, NYPL's digital collection. And if you just compare the development in 20 years, it's really quite extraordinary, especially when you think about the fact that they didn't have the benefit that we do of cranes and machination. It's really quite extraordinary. And you see that here's the Brevard mansion right here, and you see the other mansions that are following right along here, as well as some townhouses that are being built. One of the townhouses is the James and Margaret Renwick's house at 21 Fifth Avenue. This is a picture from 1935. It was also known as the Mark Twain house because Mark Twain lived there in 1904. It was reputedly designed by their son, James Renwick Jr. Margaret Renwick was a Brevard. She was the sister of Henry Jr. It's all very incestuous. James Renwick Jr. was also responsible for Grace Church and St. Patrick's Cathedral. Other mansions built along the way are one that you're sitting in right now, and there it is right there. And it's the last of the mansions built along this thoroughfare that still exists. It was built in 1853 for, I never know how to pronounce this, Irad Hawley? Is that right? Okay. I always pronounce it that way, but I wasn't sure. Who was the president of the Pennsylvania Coal Company, which had its big yards over in the Hudson River area. And now, of course, it's home to the Salmagundi Club, where you're sitting right now. This is the Hotel Brevard, originally built as three townhouses, which quickly were used as upscale boarding houses, and then they were combined and made into the Grosvenor Hotel by the 1850s, sort of following the success of the hotels that were happening on Broadway, like the Saint Denis. The central pediment was added as well. Eventually, they also took in 15 Fifth Avenue and expanded further. And this shows they still had, again, this is an 1853 Paris map, but you can still see the divisions in the original row houses that were there. Or not row houses, I guess townhouse would be a better word. And here's some interior pictures we found online through Museum of the City of New York, and there's a postcard, fabulous postcard from 1926 of the Berkeley Hotel. It was torn down in 1953, unfortunately. Then there's the Grosvenor Hotel. This was built in 1872. It was designed by Detlef Lenau. This was the first apartment hotel in New York City. And it was described by Scribner's Monthly in 1874 for a particular class of New York family, a class possessing wealth, culture, and refinement, and love of ease, and desiring the security and comfort of home with none of its cares. It is, in fact, a nest of elegant houses, each distinct and thoroughly secluded, yet all provided with the elaborate machinery and systematic service of a first-class hotel. And I'm going to get into, again, later on when we get to the 1920s, how we distinguish apartment hotels from apartments and from transient hotels. So this takes us to 1885, and we start to see some of the apartment buildings come in. Down here is the Berkeley, there's the Grosvenor Hotel, the mansion is still there. But the original mansions still are largely intact there. The four buildings that I think sort of really exemplify the changes of the late 19th century are 10 through 16 Fifth Avenue. They were built in 1848 by Henry Brevard Jr. as a speculative venture, we believe. They were built in the Gothic Revival style, which was very unusual for for row house design. Charles Lockwood talked about the fact that this style didn't lend particularly well to townhouse or row house design. However, it was important within the history of townhouses because it was the first time the Romantic movement, the styles from the Romantic movement got employed, and that would come to sort of full fruition through the use of Italianate. So these were originally built, as I said, by Trevor. He died in May of 1848, and his estate sold them. They were snatched up by very successful merchants, and for the next, up until about the Civil War, you still saw single person ownership of these houses, and again by very successful merchants. 16 Fifth Avenue was owned and occupied by Simeon Draper, who was very prominent in New York City politics. He also was made the customs person for New York City during the Civil War, appointed by Lincoln. He had a personal relationship with Abraham Lincoln. The one next to it here, 14 Fifth Avenue, that was owned and lived in by a successful banker, Adolphe Lafayette. And what happens is after the Civil War, it's no longer where people are buying single-family homes. That's happening further uptown. And so these become boarding houses. Both 14 and 16 following the Civil War were boarding houses. And in 1903, you have number 12 get replaced by this, which is a French flat. It was designed by Louis Ford. And so you see this evolution from single-family homes to multi-family homes. It's still considered an upscale area, though. So here's another apartment building that was the beginning of the 20th century. This is 43 Fifth Avenue. It was designed by, I didn't write down who it was designed by. I forgot to. I will get back to you on that. But it was, but we did find a lobby picture, so that was what was really exciting about this one, because we had a heck of a time finding some of the old lobby pictures. And it's kind of remarkable. This one was published in Habitat, the website Habitat. They were talking about future renovation of the lobby. But it's really, if you can see it, the resolution I know is a little rough, but it's really largely intact with the exception of the light fixtures here. And it's in the French Second Empire. Oh, it's in the Beaux-Arts style and built in the beginning of the 20th century. So this is the 1916 map. Again, I don't know that it's quite that changed since the 1885 map, with the exception of a few apartment buildings that have gone up. However, that's all about to change. World War I curtailed any real estate development that had been booming before World War I. Also, there was a depression after World War I, which further delayed any kind of development. But there was a tremendous need for housing at that time. And so in response to that, and in response to the need for housing, New York State legislature passed a law in 1920 which permitted municipalities to offer tax exemption on new housing in the following year. And in the following year, rather, New York City passed an ordinance which exempted new residential housing from real estate taxes for 10 years. I just reread that in my thesis, and I couldn't believe I couldn't remember that from 20 years ago, because I thought it was absolutely compelling. So can you imagine if New York City did that now? Thank God they're not going to. And what the effect was immediate, and the real estate scene would change dramatically in New York through the 1920s. According to the New York Sun, in 1921, permits were issued for New York City for 9,000 residential buildings for 14,000 families, costing $76 million. In 1922, permits were issued for 24,000 buildings for 51,000 families, costing $262 million. So you can see that. I mean, I would have done it. And so the change that happens by the time of 1930 is really quite dramatic. You can see the apartment buildings here, even beyond the Church of Ascension there. The landscape of this thoroughfare changes just like the rest of the city did. And we did a count, and there were between Washington Square North and 12th Street, 11 apartment hotels were constructed between 1921 and 1929. Such as these. This is 25 Fifth Avenue. 25 Fifth Avenue was built in 1921. It was designed by Rouse and Goldstone. And this is 35th Avenue, which was built in 1923 by Schultz and Gross. Schultz and Gross were very prolific during this time in terms of apartment buildings and apartment hotels. This is a 33 Fifth Avenue under construction. It was built within a year, between 1923 and 1924. I thought it was such a great picture that we found. This was designed by, in 1923 by Sussman and Hess, and again, another apartment building. This is a real estate brochure, and Columbia Digital Library Collections, which is available to everybody, you can go in and find these real estate brochures, and they're really fun. They're not just showing you the plans and stuff like that, but it's an advertisement for the building to try and get people to live there. And we found it for 45th Avenue. And I'm a little trouble seeing this, but from the real estate brochure, it says, 45th Avenue inherits the background of this historic neighborhood, its charm, its quiet, its residential aloofness. This 15-story apartment of pure colonial architecture overlooks the Church of the Ascension and its parish house to the south and west, and presents charming views over First Presbyterian Church and up broad sweeps of Fifth Avenue to the north. Thus, 45th Avenue is secured and permanent, unobstructed sunlight and air from every possible angle. All of the apartments have wood-burning fireplaces and enjoy at least 2 exposures. The rooms are large and are planned to give the utmost in privacy. And there is, there's the advantageous features of small private house combined with the convenience and economy of a modern apartment. And they're really fun to look at. You can actually search by architect, you can search by neighborhood for these things. And I left the website right there, in case you're interested. So we're going to venture out of our area a little bit, so I can talk to you a little bit about apartment hotels, because I've said those words a couple of times now, and it needs to be distinguished a little bit. Apartment hotels were, the first one I told you was the Grosvenor. It was responding to the need for multifamily housing and trying to do it in a way that would appeal to people. And it did. It did appeal to people and a wide array of people. There were those that were designed usually as a philanthropic effort for working class girls or men, and they were bachelor apartments or for old women. They also, but it all the way went up to people who had the country homes and wanted a pied-à-terre in the city, but didn't want to have to worry about getting servants back and forth, because the apartment hotels would provide those services. In the 1920s, they start to really appeal to developers. They start to appeal to developers because they weren't subject to the tenement laws, the 1901 tenement law, which apartment buildings were, so they were seen as potentially more profitable. The big definition, the big defining feature was that there couldn't be kitchens in the apartments themselves. They would have serving pantries or kitchenettes, and they could take up, therefore, a greater footprint on the lot than an apartment building could. They could go to greater heights, and they would. The Ritz is a perfect example. And the other thing, but it wasn't just the residential spaces that were designed differently to accommodate this. The other thing, oh, that's good. The other thing that they did was they also, architects made a point of writing in the architectural journals about the fact that public spaces needed to be different there too. And here's where they distinguished themselves from transient hotels. With the public spaces, the thought was you made it more home-like, you made it more inviting, you made it less grand. So this is the Shelton. It was built actually as a bachelor apartment. And they have, what's here is the grill, the dining room. They had a lounge. Lounges were big. They would also typically, other ones would have a writing room. But the rooms would be smaller. They'd be less grand, and it would be more home-like. The lobbies would be less grand. The other thing that worked well for the 1920s is people weren't going to restaurants as much anymore because you couldn't drink. In an apartment hotel, you could have your food sent up to you in the dumbwaiter or brought up to you and served through the serving pantry, and you could drink. Not saying how they got it. So this is the Shelton. It was designed by Arthur Loomis Harmon in 1924. And then this is the Park Lane by Schultz and Weaver. And Weaver, S. Fullerton Weaver actually wrote an article for the Architectural Forum entitled Planning the Modern Apartment Hotel. And he covered everything with different people weighing in with their expertise, including food service and how it's done, the mechanicals and how that's handled. They really got down the financial planning for an apartment building. But he talked about the design. And he used the Park Lane as his example. And for some reason in the architectural form they cut off right here, but this space was a bank. This is a fresh air fan room. And there were also writing rooms and lounges over here. But he stressed that the lobby of the apartment hotel, according to Weaver, did not need to be as large as a transient hotel. It in fact should convey the atmosphere of an entrance hall of a club. The dining room also did not need to be as large as that of a transient hotel. And the one at the Park Lane was 50 by 80 and actually had doors that opened out to the street, so it could be cut off and used for private events, and then there was more income to be had in these spaces. So they were also supposed to be very versatile. So now I take you to 1 Fifth Avenue, which went up in 1926. It was designed by Helm, Corbett, Sherwin, and Berger rather. And I show it to you because, so if we go back, this, you can't see it because of the resolution, but here there are kitchens, there are full kitchens and dining rooms. When you look at 1 Fifth Avenue's apartment layouts, this says SP right here, serving pantry. There were no kitchens, and only some had dining rooms. The second apartment hotel, oh, and this is the dining space at 1 Fifth Avenue. We found that. So the second apartment hotel that we're going to talk about, and actually I'm going to hand it over to my colleague Linda Ann, is 24 Fifth Avenue. It was designed by Emery Roth and built in 1926. And with that, I will give it over to Linda Ann.
Let me just make sure
Oh, yeah.
it's working. I'm trying to figure out how to advance these pictures.
Oh, so you just push this button right here. Her gloves are really spectacular. You guys can't see this, but her gloves, I'm going to start wearing gloves. Right here, that button. Yeah, so, and then that one's without.
And does this mic work?
It should.
Can everybody hear me in the back? Raise your hand if you can't hear me. Nobody. Okay. Thank you, Sarah.
You're so welcome.
Now it's could you raise your hand if anyone has been in my lobby, 24 Fifth Avenue? Can you raise your hand if you've actually been inside? Okay, that's great. It's hard to believe, but if you stood on the corner in 1925 of 9th Street and 5th Avenue in front of the Brevoort Mansion, you could actually see 3 very popular hotels. One that's not in Sarah's presentation was the famous Lafayette Hotel, 9th and University Place. And that was a raucous place. They had the famous French restaurant called the Café Lafayette. And artists went there, opera singers. Nellie Melba stayed there when she came to town and so forth. And the people who were planning 24 Fifth Avenue looked right down the street and they said, we don't want any of that. We don't want opera singers. We don't want loud music. We don't want Europeans. We don't want any of that. And they probably looked across the street the other way to 10th Street, which is now the NYU dorm, looked at the Grosvenor and they said, families. We don't want families. And then they looked across the street to the Brevoort. The Brevoort was this lively place. They had all sorts of dinners for Mark Twain and Dorothy Parker and commemorative events. How many know that when they raised the money for Charles Lindbergh's transatlantic flight, it was right at the Brevoort? Raise your hand if you knew that. Okay, wonderful people. Raymond Ortega was the manager of the Brevoort, and also had some, because it was French, also had a little bit of controlling interest in the Hotel Martin, which became the Hotel Lafayette. And then he felt it was just too much, and he focused on the Brevoort. But he was so well liked, and he had so many connections in Europe and Canada, France, of course, directly in France. And he kept a very lively audience going at the Brevoort. And the people who were planning the hotel said, at Brevoort, we don't want any of that. We don't want the writers, we don't want the artistes, we don't want loud people, we don't want show business people. So then they looked on the other side of the street, 25th Avenue, and that was the Berkeley Hotel. Very, very rarely photographed. I have one rare photograph where you can see half of it. And remember, all of the three places I've mentioned, not the Grosvenor, because that went up in the 20s, but all those three hotels, what did they have inside? Steps, no elevator. You walked upstairs to your room. Now the porters behind you carried your trunks with your furs and your makeup and whatever. But they all had, they were not fireproof buildings, they all had fire escapes outside. So they're looking at this, and they're looking at the Berkeley, which is at 25th Avenue. And it's show business people, it's a lot of blue blood, science, playboys. One of the actors who lived there was George Chesborough. Anybody recognize that name from the silent screen? Anybody? He was very popular in westerns in the silent screen. He was always the white hat cowboy who rode a white horse and rode off to save the farm and so forth. He had a long romantic liaison with the person who's in my documentary, Texas Guinan, who lived at 17 West 8th Street, and had Western films retitled to be things like The Gun Woman and so forth. So they're looking at the Berkeley, they're looking at the Brevoort, they're looking at the Hotel Lafayette, and they said, this is not our crowd. So who was that crowd? It's very important to know who that crowd was, because they didn't just have an interior designer come in and do the lobby. The lobby was functional for the people who rented those long 30-day, 6-month, 1-year leases upstairs. And they were strictly high-end business people. This is who this building was built for. And you can see who was upstairs worked perfectly for the way the lobby was laid out. No musicians, no all-night carousing or anything like that. Very, very serious place. Let's have a look at some of the other things. This was quite extraordinary. If anybody has ever looked at very boring real estate ads in the 20s, they either show a perspective from the front side of the building. Occasionally, they will also show blueprints of how the rooms are laid out. No one had lavish illustrations that would be quarter-page ads. And it's kind of funny because all of this old history of the horse cars and everything were quickly vanishing. So you were buying into a nostalgia that was already passing you by here. This is the very famous Fancy Ball, which was a Valentine's Day party, where the famous elopement of Matilda and young Renner, they ran off together and so forth. And the irony of this picture is that they destroyed the very building where this event happened to build this building. It's kind of ironic. Can you see the horse car? Raise your hand if you can see the horse car. That is the Berkeley Hotel. There's a sort of whitish car here and 2 horse cars right behind. That would have been the Berkeley. That's 25th Avenue. That was torn down during the Depression. Now the saloon building is up there. And there's 24th Avenue right there. And you can see the Brevoort. Do you see the marquee from the Brevoort? Can you see it? Brevoort. That's It's a very rare picture I bought 12 years ago. I don't even know who took it. That's in my collection. And there are the famous swinging doors the revolving doors from the Fifth Avenue side. And we also have a 9th Street entrance. When the Salil building was put up at 25th Avenue, they too had a 9th Street entrance and also a Fifth Avenue entrance. And they gave it away to doctors and dentists and so forth, but we kept our 2 entrances. The wonderful thing about the lobby is that they wanted high-end business people not to feel as though this was a private club or a place where you could take your grandchildren or a place where you dressed right before you went to the Broadway theater. You could enhance all of your business dealings by bringing your clients there. Now, the per diem rate of this building, I know I'm going to get smiles all over the audience when I say it was expensive. It's $1.50 to $2 a day. How many think that's funny? Okay, well let's look at what a New York City teacher's salary was in 1926. It was $28 a month. You could not afford to stay here if you worked for New York City, for example. You had to be a high-end person. They had 2 places, well actually 3 places to convene in the lobby. They had a breakfast room. Raise your hand again if you've been inside my building. Okay. If you go inside my building on the 9th Street side, directly to the left, you will see the ghost of the entrance to the breakfast room. Look up on the ceiling and you will still see an arch, and that was the original breakfast room, which would have been across the more quiet side, the 9th Street side. If you go to the back, I think there's some dentists there now. If you walk along the 9th Street side, all the way in the back, there were offices for the hotel, the banquet manager, and so forth. And all the way in the back was a quiet writing room and lounge area, no food permitted. It was the original WeWork space of Manhattan. Now the front had this fabulous, fabulous dining room. I will read some of the architectural particulars in a minute. Oh, we're having so much fun, right? It was built in the Pompeian style, which meant that you had some sunken area in the center. And so, of course, it was perfect for dancing because the tables would be all around and you could rent it for a big client supper and so forth. Give me a second. In 1926, there were no convention halls. So the building was built with salesman suites. Every floor, when you got off the elevator, was a salesman suite facing you. It would be a studio apartment linked interiorly to a 1-bedroom apartment. And some of the suites were really fabulous. Sarah, did you leave in Catherine Mcnellis's?
Did I what?
Did you leave in Catherine Mcnellis's suite?
Yep.
In this, oh, great, great, great. Let me read to you some of the particulars about the lobby. So there you were, entertaining your clients and serving them liquor, writing up all those orders. The New York Times in the 20s and 30s and even the 40s used to print all the list of the buyers coming to town. This was like the biggest sales opportunity for all these hotels and apartment hotels. The buyers are coming to town would be these big headlines in the New York Times, and they would name all of the people, what the company name was, and where they were coming from, and which hotel they'd be staying at. So you knew where to find all these people. And 24 Fifth Avenue, because of those salesman suites, comes up a lot. The Grosvenor didn't have that. If you went to the Brevoort as a salesperson with your sample kits and so forth, you had to walk up all those stairs. So this was a nice fireproof building with 5 elevators, So they had a lot of potential there for business people. So let me see. A large, elegant lobby with a long, wide corridor with carved plaster ceiling and marble mosaic panels set into pilasters, a terrazzo floor with a travertine border, and a broad Belgian marble base with marble mosaic panels set into the plaster and set off by wall sconces. Walls are of hand-molded plaster, finished in a deep buff shade, and the ceiling is of a low-relief model plastering with gold buff and blue decorations. It's still intact. You really should come by, try to ring my bell, go and look in the lobby, and see some of these marvelous things. By the way, the builders cheaped out in the moldings on the lobby. They look like marble, but in fact, they're hand-painted. They painted the strains of the marble into just regular moldings. That's kind of fun. They didn't want to spend that much money. Let's see. Lounge and writing room, rear lobby, which I described, wood paneled. Lighting was from suspended fixtures, in other words, chandeliers, and wall brackets. The lobby had a large dining room designed in Pompeian style with a sunken garden. I don't think it was actually a garden. I think it was actually a sunken dance floor, but they want to say garden. Okay. Later, it became a ballroom for wedding receptions. The 9th Street corner was converted for restaurant use and expanded into a sidewalk cafe. The sidewalk cafe in the 1930s was strictly in very pleasant weather. They would put the tables outside on the Fifth Avenue side, and they were first calling it the Fifth Avenue Cafe. At some point in the 1930s, perhaps to be more attractive to people, they retitled the restaurant Feathers, and they were grand bird cages of exotic birds in the lobby from the 9th Street side to the Fifth Avenue side. One of my neighbors was taken to the building as a child because her aunt lived there, and she remembered seeing all these exotic birds, and it was really quite a touch. I'm sure that was a unique feature of this building. So let's see what the other slides are. That's our long gone, beautiful fireplace with the mantelpiece. No longer intact, I'm afraid to say. But the ceiling looks very much like that, and we still have the original chandeliers there. There's the dining room set up. I think this is a nice, warmer image from Getty, where you can really appreciate more of the details, right? You can really see it. All in this area, it's all colors, pinks and blues. It's not just buff and dark. This is one of the spectacular people who lived in the building. Anybody recognize the name of the publisher and author, Hugh Ware or Catherine Mcnellis? Anybody? No? Hugh Ware and his wife, who was not Catherine Mcnellis, lived in this upper floor apartment. Look at the terrace that she had in 1934. This was photographed for Town and Country or Vogue or something when she moved in. He died in 1934. He was older than she was, and she moved into an apartment, the Apmann Hotel, but still very much her personal apartment that he lived in. And this is Catherine Mcnellis, who was a screenwriter at the time in Los Angeles with Walt Disney out in California. She came to a bad end, but I want you to see how lavishly she was living. Oh, there's the sidewalk cafe in warm weather. That's cool. Oh, so we're only going to see 2 pictures. Okay, I actually had a lot of pictures. So this is just some of her interior, and it looks quite cramped, but the other pictures show this lavish room with 2 large couches and so forth. So the whole idea of being a high-end business person, you had everything there. If you wanted to entertain your clients, you would go down to the dining area, or you would meet them for breakfast, or you could have food brought up to your unit. It's really very, very effective, because if you didn't want to leave, you could just stay there and have a very, very nice life. Her apartment was probably, I would estimate, at least 2,000 square feet. She had several rooms, plus that very lovely terrace. Can you see it well? Can you see it well? Can you appreciate it? The picture that you see over there was just her home office. And she had a living room and she had a bedroom in addition to that, as well as the terrace and serving pantry. She came to a bad end. When this picture was taken, Catherine Mcnellis was considered one of the 10 top businesswomen in the United States. She was the editor-in-chief and publisher of Tower magazine. But once the Depression came, magazines like Judge, Vanity Fair, people just didn't have money to eat, let alone buy these fancy magazines. So she and her brother and a business partner committed fraud by selling shares in Tower magazine that didn't really exist. And by 1940, she was in Jefferson Market Court being sentenced to 1 year and 1 day for fraud. And her name just fades from the newspaper after that. But if you look up Catherine Mcnellis, capital M, small c, capital N-E-L-I-S, you'll see a lot about her, and she really was quite the businesswoman, very, very, very successful, making a lot of money, not married, doing it all on her own, and living in high style at 24 Fifth Avenue on an upper floor. So there's the beautiful cafe, which took over both sides of the building on Fifth Avenue. These are all modern pictures taken by Conrad Bradford. Conrad took this at a slant. You can see the buff-colored walls, still the same. Nothing has changed. The wall sconces, still the same. They're electrified. They write. He took it at an angle because there were a lot of people behind the desk. But this would have been the original lobby attendance, and you would get your mail where that dark area is. There would be all these cubby holes, and your messages, your phone messages, and your mail would be in that dark recessed area. And going down, this is a newsstand that has been closed for the night. All of this is real marble, and all of this is painted to look like marble. All of this, including this little area. Behind these doors would have been the lounge, the writing room, where no meals were served. You can see the colors, right? That looks so long and spooky, doesn't it? Looks like something out of The Shining. Now, look at those beautiful, beautiful floors, the terrazzo floors with the travertine on the side. When I moved into the building, Nathan Brodsky had just taken it over. And a movie theater that used to be right across the street from St. Vincent's Hospital on 7th Avenue was going out of business. It was a Lobbies. And he decided to buy up all of their remnant rugs and cover this beautiful floor. I had no idea that this floor was even under those rugs. And he also brought them upstairs to all the landings. So for years, we had these monogram carpets that said Lobbies Hotel, Lobbies Hotel. And they would come and they would patch it and patch it. And eventually, it was just impossible to do any more patching. And someone said, well, let's replace the carpet. And they pulled it up and they found this gorgeous, gorgeous, isn't it lovely? It's a beautiful floor. Who would cover this up? Okay, I guess that's it. Do you have any questions for me or for Sarah? Thank you.
hotel.
Well, really, between 1969 and 1973, they were letting those leases expire. By 1975, nobody had an apartment lease anymore. But some people, like Jimi Hendrix, had a 2-year lease, a 3-year lease. He was considered an asset to the building. A lot of things were done on a very individual basis. Karen Crystal and Hilly Crystal, who lived on the 2nd floor, their son is still in that apartment. She managed to get a 6-year lease from the landlord. Amazing, but anybody who starts CBGB is amazing. So things were done on a very individual basis. Anybody else? Yes?
I went to a wedding at 24 Fifth Avenue. Would that have been in the former dining room?
Correct.
The whole-
Correct. The space now controlled by Forbes. When you're facing the door, you went to the right side.
Yes.
Correct. Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
I think I went to a restaurant called Feathers.
Feathers, yeah.
In the 70s,
Mhm.
right on the side where the Outfit Cafe is. But the slide of the Grosvenor Hotel, my mother took me on my first trip to New York in the 60s and stayed at the Grosvenor. Is that the same building
No.
that we showed?
No, that was replaced, yeah. That was replaced in it was 39. I think that's correct.
And then that building was replaced in 39 was the dorm.
Right, exactly, yeah. Yeah, I
Yeah,
understand.
thanks, Helen.
And just real quick, with apartment hotels, 1929, the law caught up with apartment hotels, and they were considered the same as apartment houses, so they fell out of favor with developers before there was the crash, and that's why you don't see apartment hotels proliferating the way they did then.
Isn't the Carlisle Hotel an apartment hotel?
Yes, I believe so.
Somebody else had their hand up. Don't be shy. Let's talk to you. Yes?
Hi. Were they all rentals? None of these were co-ops in Lower Fifth Avenue?
No, there were, one of them I was reading about was a co-op. Actually, it was 45th Avenue, where they were talking about some of the tenants own shares in the building. And it was in that brochure that I was reading from before. Yeah, co-ops were kind of a new thing at that time. They were a thing, and there were people that felt that if people are invested in the building, then it will be a better building. That was a theory that was sort of being passed around at the end of the 19th century and was starting to get put into play then.
I just have one other quick
Yeah.
question. Why was there an advantage for the builders to have a resident hotel as opposed to an apartment building?
Because they could follow the rules for transient hotels as far as building, which means that they could take up larger lots and they could go higher. Okay? The apartment buildings had to follow the 1901 tenement law for light and air. And there was restrictions on how much of the lot they could build on and how high they could go. So if you build more, then you have more rentable space. So.
Were some of them dark than the apartments in these resident hotels?
No, because, well, they weren't. They were, but they were really tall. Again, the Ritz is the perfect example, where it was the tallest building ever built in 1929. They kept building higher and higher. While certainly with, when people were going for a higher class of people, they wanted exposure on those lights. They weren't going to rent out the apartments. Now, that said, with something like the Allerton, which was for working girls or for bachelors, I can't quite remember the exact design, but it was cellular. You know, it was just like one room, and it would go all around the building. But they weren't dark. They still had light. But there was someone way in the back. You know? Yes.
I was just trying to Google something before I asked my question.
We're better than Google.
William Dean Howells wrote A Hazard of New Fortune.
Yes.
And I can't tell you when it was written.
He was living at 46 West 9th Street at the time.
Oh, okay. Because that's a great novel for anybody who's interested in New York real estate.
However, his daughter was very ill when he started the book, and he didn't finish out his lease. He lived there for about 6, 7, 8 months. I was doing the history of West 9th Street, and a William Dean Howells scholar got in touch with me, and he had letters by William Dean Howell, written, and he would always say, you know, Paris, France, Belgium, you know, so it was really convenient, right, where he is, right? If he had Facebook at the time, he would have known just when to go and rob his apartment, right? So I know that he took a year lease, but he didn't really fill it out. And so he was on the move when he was writing that book because of his daughter's illness. I think she eventually died young. Yeah.
Well, the characters in the, you know, it's a couple who moves from Boston to New
Correct.
York. It's so much fun.
It is.
Anyway, the wife has been tasked with finding an apartment for them to live in. And so at that time, I guess that people had apartments that were furnished that they were renting. It's like she sublet it from somebody.
They were subletting it.
Yeah, and apparently, whoever this woman was that they sublet from had like terrible taste. And so the wife goes through and like fills up bags of like trinkets and doilies and stuff like that all over and stores them so that it's acceptable for her to rent.
Well, remember, that's a walk-up building. It was built in 1898.
I don't know which building was actually in the novel, but
No, it's very clear that he modeled it on that. If you know the building at the time, yeah, that would have been it. It's next to the Portland. There's the Portland and so forth. There's 3 of them in a row.
Okay.
Owned by a woman. Yes.
Why did you, or not, you said there was a salesman's unit on every.
Salesman's suite. Right when you open up the elevator door, the thing that you're looking at on every single floor, the way it was built, not now, not anymore, was a studio apartment with a serving pantry linked in the interior so you didn't have to go out into the corridor to a 1-bedroom. And the salespeople would sleep in the studio apartment and be having their wares and so forth and taking orders and so forth. Remember, there's no convention center, there's no Javits Center, there's no Coliseum or anything like that. So when the buyers came in, they had to come to a place where they could see and then place their orders for shoes or, you know, whatever. Does it sound strange, a salesman's suite on every floor? But it was built.
Coffee stations now.
Say again?
It's like the coffee stations now in some of the hotels.
Somebody said, yes.
I had a question, I guess,
Yes.
Sarah. Do you know how this building survived?
This one?
Yeah.
My understanding is because the Salmagundi Club bought it, took it over. That's my understanding of it. I think we have a lot of other people who are more expert in this question than I in this room. But that's my understanding. Am I getting a no from anybody over here, or is that right? I'm right? I'm right.
What year was that?
1911? 17. Thank God we have these people here.